The machine beeped 3 times, then flatlined, sending nurses sprinting and a doctor slamming through the double doors. But in the corner of room 114, a small boy barely 8 years old simply opened his eyes, looked at his mother, and spoke the 4 words that would change everything. "I just want him." His mother froze, her hands trembling, because she knew exactly who her son meant. The one man she had spent 6 years trying to forget. The one man whose name she had never once spoken aloud in front of her child. The one man who didn't even know this boy existed. The most powerful man in the city. And her son was dying. His name was Daniel Reyes, 8 years old, 4 feet tall, with a smile so wide it seemed too big for his thin face. A boy who loved dinosaurs, drew animals left-handed because his right had been weak since birth, and asked his mother questions like, why is the sky the same color as sadness? And do clouds ever get tired of floating? He was the kind of boy strangers smiled at without knowing why. Something about him making the world feel softer. But Daniel was sick, and had been for 2 years. Though his mother Maria had spent the first year refusing to believe it, first came the fatigue, his face pressing gently into his dinner plate with a fork still in his hand. Then the unexplained bruises dotting his arms like purple flowers after rain. Then the nosebleeds, then the fevers that wouldn't break, until the diagnosis finally came and Maria sat alone in the hospital parking lot for 40 minutes. Before she could go back inside, having made herself a promise she intended to keep, she would not cry in front of him. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She signed the papers, scheduled the appointments, sold her car to cover the first round of bills, worked the morning shift at the diner and the evening shift at the laundromat, then came home to sit beside Daniel's bed and listen to him breathe, telling him only that he had sick blood the doctors were going to fix, and Daniel accepted this. The way children accept most things, completely and without demanding more than he was given, because he trusted her. He always trusted her. For 18 months the treatment worked. The cancer retreated, the bruises faded, and Daniel filled notebooks with sketches of elephants and whales and a creature he invented himself, half lion, half butterfly, that he called a lionfly, the bravest animal in the world. He said, because it was soft and strong at the same time. Then, 2 months ago, the cancer came back, and this time the doctor's voice was quieter, slower, full of words like aggressive and resistant and limited options. And when Maria asked how much time they had, he looked at her for a long moment before answering if they didn't find a bone marrow donor. In the next 30 days, they were looking at weeks, maybe less. Maria drove home, sat outside in the cold for an hour, then went inside and helped Daniel finish his lionfly drawing. She still didn't cry in front of him, but that night, alone in her kitchen at 2 a.m, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched in over 6 years, and inside was a single folded piece of paper, a name, an address, a decision she had always believed was the right one. She wasn't sure anymore. Marcus Cole did not have bad days, not because his life was without difficulty, but because he had trained himself over 43 years to convert difficulty into momentum, pain into purpose, setbacks into strategy, treating emotion as inefficiency and inefficiency as the one thing he could not tolerate. He was the founder and CEO of Cole Medical Group, a healthcare and pharmaceutical company operating across 22 countries, with 12,000 employees and a market valuation that appeared regularly in financial headlines. Built from nothing, from a single rented office, a borrowed laptop, and a conviction so absolute it bordered on frightening at the cost of relationships, sleep, and a marriage that lasted 14 months, before quietly dissolving like something neither party had ever truly committed to. He was respected, feared, discussed in business schools, featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at conferences where people paid large sums to sit in rooms and absorb his certainty. And he was also, by almost any conventional measure, completely alone. His assistant Patricia, a composed woman who had worked for him for 9 years, knew his coffee order, his flight preferences, his tolerance for small talk none, and his feelings about surprises hostile, scheduling his life in 15-minute blocks and understanding long ago that anything outside the schedule was not a disruption but an emergency, which was why, on a Tuesday morning in late November, when she received a phone call from a caller on no list with a name that meant nothing, making a request so far outside anything she had ever been asked to manage that she nearly laughed. She almost didn't put it through. But then the caller said something something quiet and specific. That made Patricia sit very still for several seconds before she said, "Hold please," stood up, and walked directly into Marcus Cole's office without knocking, which she had never done in 9 years. Marcus looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who had just witnessed a small earthquake. "Patricia, I know," she said, "but you need to take this call." 3 days before the machine flatlined, Daniel had reached over and touched Maria's hand while she read to him from a book about ocean animals. He did this sometimes. Just touched her hand like he was checking she was still real, and said, quietly, "I know about my dad," stopping Maria's breath entirely. His face was calm, not accusatory, not angry, just open the way it always was, like a door never quite fully closed. And he told her he had found the paper in the drawer a long time ago, that he hadn't said anything because she never wanted to talk about it, that he wasn't mad. He didn't want anything from his father, he said, his voice so steady it broke her heart. He knew the man didn't know about him, knew it was complicated, but he kept thinking there might be a reason they were supposed to meet. Not for him, but because maybe his father needed to know something. Maybe he was supposed to tell him something. "I just want to meet him once," Daniel said. "That's my wish. Just once. I won't make it hard. I promise I won't make it hard for anyone." Then he reached over to his bedside table and held out a folded piece of paper, a letter he had written. He explained, in case she couldn't find him, or in case he didn't want to come, she could just give it to him after. Maria took the letter with shaking hands, pressed it against her chest without opening it, looked at her extraordinary, impossible son, and for the first time in 2 years let herself cry. And Daniel reached up and wiped her cheek with his thumb and said softly, "It's okay, Mama. I think everything is going to be okay." It took her for more days to make the call. She reached Patricia after being transferred twice, explained haltingly that she had a personal matter for Mr. Cole, that it involved a child, that it was urgent, and when she gave her name, there was a pause on the line that lasted exactly for seconds. For seconds Maria would think about for a long time afterward, before Patricia said the words that made her knees buckle. "He'll know who you are." The letter Daniel had written, Maria still hadn't read. It sat folded into a careful square in her coat pocket, carried everywhere, and she told herself she was keeping it safe. But the truth was simpler and harder than that. She was afraid of what it said. Marcus received Maria's name like a physical impact. She was part of a chapter he had closed deliberately and with both hands. A nurse at a clinic his company had partnered with back when he was 36, and still building from the ground up. Intelligent, warm in a way that had surprised him. Someone he had spent 5 months with in something he couldn't quite call a relationship, because he had never fully committed to it, never fully committed to anything outside of work. And when she left, he told himself it was mutual, that they had wanted different things, that it had simply run its course. And he never questioned it, never looked back, because he was very good at not looking back. But when Patricia put the call through and he heard Maria's voice for the first time in 6 years, quieter now, careful, carrying something heavy, something happened that Marcus Cole was entirely unprepared for. He felt afraid, not in any way he recognized, not the productive fear of a business risk or a failing quarter, but something older, something underneath the architecture he'd spent decades constructing. She told him about Daniel without her voice breaking, presenting it almost clinically, the diagnosis, the return, the donor search, the timeline, and then said, "He asked to meet you, once. That's all." Marcus asked why, his voice coming out smaller than he intended. And she told him Daniel said he had something to tell him, that he had written a letter in case Marcus said no, but that he was hoping he'd come. A silence stretched between them like a bridge over something neither wanted to look at directly. And then Marcus asked how old he was, and Maria hesitated for just one breath, one small hesitation that told him everything. Before she said, 8. Marcus did the math the way a man always precise with numbers does, the calculation taking less than 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, something inside him that had been kept sealed and untouched for a very long time began to crack. And he said, "I'll come," before. Leaving the office, he called his medical director and said nothing, except that he needed the company's bone marrow. Donor registry cross-referenced immediately with a specific patient file he would send within the hour. And the results came back at 6 in the morning. And Marcus sat in his home office in the early gray light and read the report 3 times. His hands, which had signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling, not entirely steady. He was a match, a near-perfect match. He sat with that for a long time while outside the city woke up slowly. Traffic starting, coffee being made, the ordinary world turning on its ordinary axis. Completely unaware that in a room on the 14th floor of a building no one was looking at, a man was sitting with the weight of something irreversible. He had a son. His son was dying, and he could save him. The quarterly board meeting of Cole Medical Group began at 9 a.m. on a Thursday, exactly on time as always. 17 board members, 3 executive vice presidents, lead legal counsel, 2 external advisors, and a 90-slide presentation covering fourth quarter projections to pending acquisitions, and a new licensing agreement worth $300 million. With Marcus sitting at the head of the table in his dark suit, no tie, the quiet authority of a man who has never needed to perform power because he simply has it, advancing through slides, answering questions, approving the licensing framework, until at 9:47 a.m. he said stop and something. In the quality of the silence that followed made 17 experienced professionals register collectively. That something was different about him this morning, something underneath the surface. "I need to tell you something," he said, and then told them that 3 days ago he had visited a boy named Daniel Reyes at St. Augustine Children's Hospital, 8 years old, leukemia, a bone marrow donor match found through their own registry, the procedure scheduled for next week, and that Daniel was his son. A son he hadn't known existed until 4 days ago. A failure not in any legal sense, but in every human sense, one he was not going to minimize. He reached into his jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table, a child's handwriting in blue marker on the outside, slightly uneven, slightly too large for the CEO, from Daniel, and explained that Daniel had given him the letter when he visited, had asked him to read it in front of people, because, Marcus said, quoting exactly, "Grown-ups forget things when they're alone, but they remember better when someone is watching." Then he opened the letter and read it aloud, that Daniel didn't want anything, that he wanted to meet him in case they had the same blood and his marrow could help, that his mother had never once said a bad thing about Marcus, not ever, not even when she was tired and sad, that Daniel had heard her cry at night, but she never said it was anyone's fault, that she was protecting him the way she protected everyone, that he had drawn Marcus a lionfly, brave because it was soft and strong at the same time, and that Marcus didn't have to feel bad because Daniel had had a good life. His mom had made sure, but if Marcus wanted to be his dad, Daniel thought that would be okay, and that he was pretty good at drawing and could teach him. Marcus stopped reading. The room was completely silent, Patricia pressing the fingers against her mouth, the board members looking at the table or the window or anywhere but the letter. The company's lead legal counsel, Gordon, a precise man who had spent 30 years in corporate law, priding himself on composure, clearing his throat once and then saying nothing. Marcus folded the letter carefully, placed it back in his pocket, and told them he had come to run the meeting and he would, that they had work to do and he wasn't walking away from his responsibilities, but that he needed them to know this because what he was about to do next would affect the company, and they deserved to understand why. He was establishing the Daniel Reyes Foundation, funding bone marrow donor registry expansion, pediatric cancer research, and financial support for single parents navigating long-term childhood illness, seeding it with a personal contribution of $50 million, and asking each of them to consider what the company could contribute, not as APR exercise, but because it was the right thing. Then he picked up his pen, because he had always been more comfortable with action than with feeling, and said, "Now, slide 43, let's keep going." The bone marrow transplant was performed 11 days later. Marcus sitting through the pre-procedure process with a patience he had never been able to offer anything outside of work, the patience of someone who understands the only option is to wait. And he was not good at waiting, but he was learning, while somewhere on the wall of the recovery ward, a nurse had placed one of Daniel's drawings without being asked, because the boy in room 114 had given drawings to half the staff, and they had each kept them, the way people keep things that matter. In the waiting area, Maria and Marcus sat across from each other without talking for a long time, because there was too much to say, and they were both people who had learned to be careful with words. until Maria said he was going to ask a lot of questions, that he was relentless, that he didn't stop until he understood something completely. And Marcus said he knew where he got that, and something passed across Maria's face, complex and old and not fully resolved, before she said she should have told him, that she had convinced herself it was simpler not to, that he had moved on, that it was better for Daniel, that she had also been afraid, and Marcus said he should have been someone she felt she could tell, that was on him, and they sat with that for a while, not resolved, not erased, but acknowledged, held up to the light briefly before being set down with care. 6 weeks later, Daniel came home, thinner, tired in ways that required weeks more rest. But the cancer was retreating. The transplant was working. His doctors using words like responding and positive indicators and cautiously optimistic. Words Maria collected like currency and spent against her fear in the quiet hours of the night. And on a Saturday afternoon, Marcus came to visit, bringing nothing because he didn't know what to bring. Standing in the doorway of Daniel's small room covered in drawings, the walls a gallery of animals and creatures and one large lionfly in the center above the bed, feeling completely unprepared until Daniel looked up from his sketchbook, regarded him for a moment with the calm assessment of a child who had spent 8 years learning to read rooms, said you came back, and when Marcus said he'd said he would, Daniel nodded, shifted over, patted the space beside him, and asked if he wanted to learn how to draw the lionfly. Marcus sat down on the bed that was too small for him, feeling enormous and uncertain and strangely, inexplicably close to something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Told Daniel he wasn't good at drawing, and Daniel handed him a blue marker and said that was okay, that you just had to not be scared of getting it wrong, that the wings go first because they're the hardest part. But if you get the wings right, the rest is easy, and Marcus put the marker to the blank page. The Daniel Reyes Foundation launched publicly 3 months later, covered by financial press, medical journals, and 2 national news outlets, registering 40,000 new potential donors in its first 6 weeks, and funding pediatric oncology units in 3 cities with equipment and staffing they had been requesting for years. And at the launch event, Marcus gave for minutes of his scheduled 7-minute speech, before stopping, looking at the audience, and saying that his son had told him the best speeches are the ones where you just say the true thing and then stop talking. And the true thing was that he had almost missed him, had almost gone through his entire life never knowing he existed, and that every good thing he was doing now started with an 8-year-old boy who decided, when he had every reason not to give him a chance, and then he stopped, and the room applauded, and in the front row Daniel, seated between Maria and Patricia, who had come not as an employee, but as a person who felt she had earned the right to be there, covered his mouth with both hands to hide the size of his smile, and it didn't work. On the morning of Daniel's 9th birthday, Marcus arrived early with a sketchbook he had filled over for months, every page an uncertain, imprecise, earnest drawing of animals and objects, and one recurring attempt at a lionfly that got slightly better each time, and handed it to Daniel without ceremony. And Daniel flipped through it slowly until he stopped on the last page, where Marcus had drawn, badly and lovingly and with visible effort, a lionfly, and beneath it written in handwriting neater than his son's, but no more confident, 3 words, still learning, always. Daniel looked at it for a long time, then looked up and said, "This one's the best," and Marcus Cole, the man who did not have bad days, who had built an empire on certainty, who had spent 43 years keeping the world at the length of a boardroom table, smiled in a way that none of his board members, none of his advisors, none of his magazine profiles had ever captured, full, unguarded, real. "I had a good teacher," he said.